Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jeff Dahan. I work for Microsoft as a Microsoft Cloud Solutions Architect focusing on infrastructure. Today, we're going to be focusing on how to architect a secure and well-managed Microsoft Azure environment. Again, I really appreciate your time. I understand that it is early morning for some of you and late evening for others. So let's get started, and I'm hoping you all get a lot out of this. So I wanted to go over a little agenda today. So in general, I have some housekeeping items. As much as possible, please save your questions to the end. And as we approach the end of the presentation, I'll do my best to get back to everyone possible. Given the quantity of people online right now, that might be a little difficult, but I'll do my best to answer some of the most common questions. After that, we're going to get into what's changed about our landscape in IT. And we're going to do a deeper dive into what it means to secure and manage your architecture. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Jeff. I have a background in cloud, infrastructure, IT management. Mostly throughout my career, I've been on the customer side. I've worked in large global financials. I also consulted for manufacturing and legal. I'm dating myself a little bit, but I've spent close to 20 years in the IT industry. And when I started, cloud was a little bit of, oh, looks like someone is hearing an echo. Can anyone else please let me know if you hear the same? Okay, it looks like only one person's hearing an echo. Hopefully that will resolve itself. So you can reach me at LinkedIn. There's a link there. And also, I've attached a whole bunch of links for you today in the attachment and links section that will reference a lot of the material that we're going over today. So let's get right into it. Everyone's going digital. A lot of people are already going digital. What does that mean? By 2020, there's an expectation for 1 million devices per hour to be coming online. That is a tremendous amount of devices that's going to be feeding a lot of data and a lot of analytics from many companies that have a major focus on their customers. Another shocking item is, you know, when you think of the S&P 500 and the global markets, companies typically are around for many, many years. However, when you look at the amount of disruption that's happened, fueled by technology, half of the S&P 500 is going to be either replaced, and the 12 years will be the average age. Another amazing number is 60% of computing will occur in the public cloud by the year 2025. These are not surprising numbers, but overall this should be a real eye-opener for anyone who has not looked at this to realize there's a lot of change going on right now. So how do we start thinking about enabling the cloud organization? In general, IT is moving from silos into a lot more of a business-oriented organization. So instead of being just a cost center, we're really an enabler. So what's going to happen is you're going to be getting lots of business requirements from your lines of business. They're going to be trying to disrupt or avoid being disrupted. That means you have to very quickly work with your development teams to ensure that you can get to market with a minimum viable product as quickly as possible and for as inexpensive as possible. But in order to do that, a lot of us on the phone have to think about what are we going to do to evolve ourselves. Again, I've been in the industry for a long time. The type of IT employee that I was 10 years ago would not be able to cut it today. If there's anything that I've learned is that change is constant. And you really have to love learning and love teaching to stay sharp in this landscape. So I want to talk a little bit about what I call and other people call an application rationalization. So if your company is not a startup, you'll probably be able to categorize most of your assets into a couple of areas. So one of them would be new. That's basically new line of business requests in order to drive disruption. Those can be brand new applications that are probably going to be cloud enabled or more at the PaaS or the SaaS layer. On the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have the do not touch. those are the systems that have been around for a long time, perhaps some of the mainframe systems where touching them, given their complexity, maybe people have come and gone in terms of who wrote the code. No one knows how to fix it. I think we all know what those systems look like, and you want to leave those alone. You don't want to migrate those. Replatforming. This tends to be a little bit of a sticking point because if you have a mission-critical application, do you want to invest in replatforming it? Are you going to rewrite the code? Are you going to decide to make it cloud-enabled? If you don't, it'll fall into the category of retire, where you're going to let it die on the vine. That might be an application that is doing what it needs to be doing, but over time, it's going to be replaced, and it's hopefully going to be less mission-critical. The reality is, as we talk to lots of our customers, there are a lot of applications that fall into all of these areas. So today, we're going to really talk about what we can do to get our hands around this situation, because we all have applications in all four of these quadrants. So going back a little bit to the IT architect role, again, this hits a personal nerve for me because this used to be me. I used to think that what I needed to do from a day-to-day basis was much more focused on providing specific IT services. Now it's much more business focused with a much bigger focus on the end user and the customer. When I used to work in IT, I didn't really know at all times what was going on in the marketplace for the business that I was in. Hearing myself say that now, that sounds ridiculous, but that was just a reality at that point in time. Order taking. I'm sure lots of people remember, maybe they still go through this, where you get a rushed demand from a line of business saying that they need X, Y, or Z up and running as soon as possible. Success may have been measured at that time on, hey, can you turn around and spin up the requirements for that end user? Now it's, let's think about if this is the right thing to be doing. That's what we call the challenger mentality. This is a great one. Individual successes and heroic efforts. For anyone who's read the Phoenix Project, maybe they know who Brent is. If you have not read the Phoenix Project, please go and do so. It's a great book that describes this sort of change. It used to be really cool to be the hero, have all the information in your mind. However, as we all know, things change, people move on, and then what does your company do when you leave? So that's not cool anymore. Now, a lot of things should be more process driven, and you want to work more as a team. Finally, highly structured and predictive. Look, I think governance and I think having rules and regulations are very important, but there's also, it's not so much a science, there's also an art to how you implement that. And when you think of DevOps teams and how some people might be focused on the security and the compliance and making sure that config management is where it needs to be, there's much more of a team approach to how we achieve these goals. In the end, if this is going the way that it should be, we're going to be delivering some really good customer value. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of what it means to be operating in the cloud environment today. There is a shared responsibility model. Back when people had their own data centers, those very much were silos, and you knew for the most part, unless if you had a breach, that your data was in the four walls. Now, as we are migrating to IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS models using multiple cloud providers, it could be a little more difficult to really say with a straight face where your data lives. Same thing goes for security visibility. There was a time where you pretty much had your assets, you know what security products were in existence, and you had possibly a dashboard or two, depending on the products installed, to tell you how things were going. Data sovereignty. This is becoming a lot more important for compliance relative to GDPR and other regulations. Where does your data live? What data center is it physically sitting in any of your cloud providers? Do you have replication turned on? If you do, where's it going? Data access, very closely related. Again, not only from the security aspect, do you know who is accessing your data, but are you violating any of the data sovereignty? Are people in different countries accessing data that they shouldn't be, even if you think that they should be allowed to? Remote workers. This is a very interesting one. Now that there's a high demand for anybody to be accessing anything using any device, what does that mean? Do you still have a network perimeter that you think that you did? If you think of the amount of secure connections that are being made and where the boundaries of your network really are, the reality is you don't have network boundaries that span a physical data center anymore. They go all the way down to your devices. Platform operations. Again, this is one I take very personally. When I was working at one of my recent companies and we started adopting cloud, the cloud was supposed to be sort of a panacea. It was supposed to be an easy button for lots of things. The reality was, unless if it's well managed and well planned, you end up with a balloon effect where you have the same people trying to manage a lot more, and they might not have the capabilities to do so. Config management. Again, configurations for your known assets, whether they were physical systems or virtualized systems within your data center, you may have had a pretty good handle on them. Anytime a new technology comes about and people start adopting, are those configuration management systems going to be compatible with your existing structure? Are they going to be compatible with your existing guidelines and management? So these are definitely things that you need to consider. Finally, cost. Cloud is supposed to be cheaper, right? Not always, and that goes for any technology. If you're not thinking about how you're going to save money and what your plan should be, you could end up with a lot of problems. It is very easy to consume resources that you should not be, and we're going to talk about how to prevent that in a little bit. But in general, it's very easy to lose accountability. There's lots of corporate cards going around large companies, and it's very easy to enter in the numbers, and all of a sudden, people have resources and they can bypass IT with shadow systems, and that creates lots of problems. So now the real question becomes, all those outcomes you wanted to achieve with using cloud as resources, can you still achieve them successfully? Are you going to be agile? Are you going to be saving money? Are you going to be the disruptor or the disrupted? So, if I haven't scared you enough, I'm not trying to scare you, I'm just trying to be realistic. There's a lot of complexity out there. In general, we have multiple cloud providers to choose from. We have SaaS providers, we have PaaS providers. You have your own internal data centers to choose from. Each system that you're going to be implementing has its own element manager. You could end up with many different systems for change control, security control, different programming languages, different scripting languages, etc. Finally, there is the question of lock-in. A lot of people try to avoid lock-in, but the reality is at some point, if you develop against a system, whether it be open source or whether it be something that's licensed, you are making a decision, and that will involve some lock-in. So do not create indecision. You want to try to make smart decisions, but beware that if you try to abstract too much, you might end up in a worse situation than you started it. There is a way to simplify this, and that's really what I'm here today to talk to you about with Azure. So this is a little bit of a taxonomy that I want to talk about today. In the center here, we have technology services. What are technology services? Those are services that you are providing to your lines of business, possibly directly to end users that consume your company's products. The thing to think about here is I'm not focusing, when I talk about technology services, on any specific cloud at this point or any specific product. In general, this is what you do from a day-to-day basis. Now, the question is, how do you do it? And that's where we get into architecting against those services. There's going to be the notion of securing. That deals with security management and threat protection. How are you protecting those assets, whether it be backup or disaster recovery? Monitoring. It's the question of how do you know? Are things running the way that you want? What are you doing with those alerts? Are you getting the alerts that you need to be getting? Going back to configuration. Are things really running in the way that's expected? Are they configured the way that they should be, which could expose lots of other problems? Governance. Anyone who has had to fill out any sort of compliance form or go through an audit understands how important this is to your company, but also the complexity in making sure that you are compliant. So let's get started. We're going to focus in on governance. Now I'm going to start talking a little bit more about some of the Azure products. So this slide is a little bit busy, but the thing that I want everyone to focus on here is Azure has more certifications than any other cloud provider. You know, this might seem like a very big marketing slide, but what I really want people to take away from here is our dedication to ensuring that we can cover all the bases of our customers. Microsoft has been around for a very long time, as many people know, and through that time, we have always been focused on securing and being compliant. This is really in our DNA. So this isn't anything that we tried to do in the past few years. This is something that has been an ongoing ambition of ours to ensure that we can serve your needs. Let's talk about Compliance Manager. So this is a great workflow that we offer. So think of it as compliance management as a service. This is a dashboard-driven system which allows you to create reports against a multitude of compliance requirements, whether it be some of the ISO certifications or whether it be GDPR. The really great thing here is we split this up based upon what's required by Microsoft and what we're actually reporting to our auditors. So you have visibility into that and how we're scoring against those categories. But also, you have the ability to create action items and upload your own collateral for all of your compliance into this system. So while you still will likely be working with a third-party provider, if you're a smaller company, you might be able to work with this utility and do this yourself. The scope here is Azure, of course, Office 365, Dynamics 365. So this essentially will be covering most of the Microsoft estate in the cloud, whether it be SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS. And again, it also allows you to add your own action items and assignments. Azure policy. So this is a very interesting one. So before I was talking about how once you have a credit card, people can go rogue. However, if you are doing a good job planning this out, you can go ahead and assign policies to the users that are out there, such that when you give people capabilities in the cloud, you can actually control what they're deploying and almost treat everything else as an exception. For instance, you might have standards around what OS versions or VM sizes or networks you want to come online. Perhaps you don't want people to bring online certain VNets that might cause potential issues with routing. You have the ability to do this and report against it. The nice thing is, if you have Azure already and you have not taken advantage of this, you can turn it on and it'll go back and tell you where the violations are, so you can true those up. So again, this gives you a very controlled and governed way to ensure that your resources are being used the way that you want them to be used. Cost management. This obviously hits a nerve with just about everyone. At the end of the day, if your company is spending too much, you're probably going to hear about it. Azure, Microsoft bought the company Cloudin. One nice thing about this company is it is multi-cloud compliant. And what that means is we can take a look at costs from the 3 major cloud providers and help you determine how you're doing in terms of are resources deployed properly? Could you actually compare the price for your resources across the 3 providers? We also allow you to enter in budget information to see how you're tracking. This helps you avoid overspending. And in general, the other great thing is you can do chargeback, whether you want to do it in showback or chargeback mode. This can be enabled, and it's a real great way to see how your lines of business, if you've enabled them, are spending money against the resources. Finally, there's optimization. You know, people might chuckle if I say this, but if you were spending too much money in Azure, that's not good for anybody. It's not good for you, and it's not good for Microsoft either. We want you to spend money right. If your company grows and you're happy with our service, you'll probably consume more. We don't think of this as a short-term sales game. We want to be in this and partner with you for the long term. So here's just a couple of screenshots of what some of these items might look like for cost analysis. In addition, you can create lots of different customized reports and schedule those reports and whatnot to go to senior management as needed, especially the finance. If anyone's received a CSV report of a bill from the cloud, they aren't always pretty. Okay, that wraps up governance. Let's talk about security, a hot topic for everyone. So I like this, these few sentences here. The gist of this is that a few years ago, there was a lot of skepticism of, are cloud providers more secure than the four walls of my data center? Now I think it's fairly well known that if you think about the size of the security organizations at Microsoft and the duration and time we've been spending focusing on security, it's highly unlikely or cost effective that an individual company or consumer is going to be able to build out a better security construct. So that is what this referral slide has to do with. We are very good at security. I want to explain more about it to you in the following slides. And there's lots of ways that you can secure not only what is in Microsoft Azure, but other cloud providers and your on-prem. So when we think about logical security and network layer, there's a taxonomy that we follow here in terms of outward in and inward out. As everyone knows, distributed denial of service is a really big problem. As the outermost layer of our networks, that's where we focus bidirectionally. So if there are denial of services trying to occur inbound, we will see those and deal with them. Also, if one of your systems has been compromised and is trying to launch its own denial of service outbound, we'll take care of that for you as well. The next layer down is your VNet. That essentially is the virtual data center. That's where all of your networks reside, and that is where all of your resources will reside. Within those VNets, you have various subnets that you'll be building out, where routing, access control, and firewalling on a subnet by subnet basis can occur. This is a great way to essentially build out the equivalent of DMZs should you desire. You can have those subnets talk to each other, be able to access the internet. You can create isolation for dev and testing. It's all very modular. Going back one more layer, you have the VM firewall. So the nice thing here is at the perimeter of your VM, you can also turn on security groups as well that exist in Azure. And those allow you to treat your individual VMs in a microservices fashion. Again, you don't have to just wall off entire subnets. You can do this at the individual VM layer. And of course, now you go into the operating system level. That's where you can go ahead and enable whatever security products that you're used to for the final level of securing your individual assets and your services. But that's not all. I wanted to talk to you about data center security as well. So we have over 54 regions online globally right now. Each region consists of 2 or more data centers. So this does not count the one that's underwater right now off the coast of Europe. That one has its own security. I think there's some fish guarding it, but this has to do with a lot of our data centers where, when you think about the perimeter, we have fencing, we have barriers, we have, state-of-the-art technology to ensure that we are not getting breached in any way. Then when you go one level inward to the building, that's where we have things to, ensure that we can withstand reasonable seismic bracing to deal with things like earthquakes or other natural disasters. 24/7 security staff, we have generators. Down to the individual computer room layer, of course, there's going to be biometric 2-factor access, lots of security guards. Anyone who has visited any of our data centers, which you can do upon request, you'll see firsthand that there that there is a lot of security that goes in there. Okay, any security conversation would be incomplete without talking about identity. So Microsoft Azure uses essentially what's called Microsoft Azure Active Directory. This covers not only what you're used to when you go ahead and configure your applications and your IaaS inside of Azure, but this also spans things like Office 365 and Dynamics. We offer lots of integration that can go ahead and connect into your existing Active Directory. We have lots of options there where you can go ahead and essentially mimic the users and passwords that you have for single sign-on. In addition, you can do things such as pass-through or federate, such that you don't have to have your internal Active Directory on premises exposed. Finally, you can treat Azure as an extra data center. You can go ahead and deploy domain controllers inside of Azure if you so choose, and again, treat that with regular Active Directory replication. Some of the extra features that you get, however, have to do with advanced sign-in and risk-based protection. For instance, let's say you have multi-factor authentication enabled. Depending on the risk, let's say someone is logging in from a country where they haven't logged in from before. Is that a good login? Is that something that you want to have happen? So one thing that you can enable is increased challenges based upon that risk. So perhaps someone is not two-factor and they need to be two-factor, or they get asked additional questions, or they have to do multiple additional login activities. So I want to talk about Azure Security Center. So this is an amazing product. What the Security Center does is, this is a dashboard into your entire security landscape. And again, this goes not only within Azure, but this can go off-prem and into other cloud providers as well. This allows you to, from a bird's eye perspective, very quickly see if your policy and compliance is where it needs to be. In terms of your resource hygiene, and we can also go much deeper into threat protection. This dashboard is completely drilled down, and you can actually remediate from within depending on what some of the issues are. So we are Windows and Linux compliant with our monitoring capabilities, and this is a continuous monitoring solution. So you will be getting notifications, and when you access this dashboard, it's always going to be up to date. Another great thing here, because we're really trying to give you a central repository to look at everything, you can integrate different partner solutions in here, such as different firewall vendors, whether or not they're on-prem or inside of Azure. Essentially, you're just pointing the logs at the Security Center. So the next two slides, I want to show you some interesting examples. One of my colleagues gave me a great story where one of his customers was doing a lift and shift. And essentially what they were doing is they were taking their individual assets and they were migrating them into Azure. And within a couple hours, they had some interesting alerts generated without them having to do anything. So it turns out some of their systems were compromised in such a way that their existing security infrastructure on-prem didn't have awareness into this, such as whether or not they're spamming or they're trying to launch brute force attacks from within these VMs. So Azure quickly called these out, and the customer was able to deal with those. Same thing happened with the SQL database, where there were SQL injections occurring. So there's a lot of value add that you will get simply by existing and having your systems persist inside of Azure that you might not be able to get with your on-prem without a significant investment. So I want to talk a little bit about our advanced analytics. So we have a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning, which ties into our threat intelligence. And what this means is, let's say, for example, you have a VM where people are logging into it 5 times a day via RDP or via SSH. If someone tries to log into that 100 times, or if there's 100 login attempts, that that seems kind of suspicious. So what Azure has the ability to do is we're looking at deep heuristics to understand if patterns are changing without a great explanation. And so what's happening is, we're looking for some of these brute force activities. We're looking for, potentially a traffic going to IPs that theoretically should be blacklisted. And we're forming this picture of something is happening. We should be aware of it, and we're gonna make you aware of it. And really, this offers some great zero-day protection, which is built into our platform. So let's go through an example here. So perhaps you have an RDP brute force attack that's occurring. Once that happens, there can be some inappropriate commands being run. Those will lead to, if they have succeeded in seeding some malware, they might try some lateral movement or try to enumerate accounts. One thing is, because we're able to deeply look into a lot of this metadata as it's occurring, as being logged, we can quickly paint a picture of what's happening here and realize that there is an exploit occurring, where if you think about the individual capabilities of malware prevention, they might not see that. So again, this is kind of a final slide in talking about the kill chain, where perhaps you have an inbound brute force attack that occurs. Known malware signatures may or may not capture that, but if you combine what's happening with the attack and then what's happening post-breach, we're able to see that and put together a story. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about Azure Advisor. So again, this goes back to looking at things across cost and performance, high availability, and security. We will be constantly looking at your environments that are implemented within Azure, and we will try to find ways to recommend best practices in any of these areas. We will list those out, we can report against them, and you can essentially have the opportunity to look at all of these outputs to decide if this is something that you want to take action on. Okay, closing out security, I want to talk about third party. So whenever I would be running any of my previous environments, one thing that I was always skeptical of is, perhaps a third-party vendor would come in and say, hey, try my product or move to our product. This is going to be really easy. Well, the reality is there's always going to be sort of a bubble period where you're going to have to maintain multiple infrastructures. We certainly appreciate that, and what we have done is we have a large marketplace of a lot of these third-party vendors which you may be using today. So as an example, perhaps you're a Checkpoint customer or a Cisco customer, and you want to continue operating using those solutions and maintaining those relationships. Well, because of our partnerships, you can. You don't have to use the firewalling technology that we have built into Azure. You are just as fine installing Checkpoint and routing everything to your virtual checkpoint. And same thing goes for your logging and different third-party options. We're not forcing you into a construct. We're very open in that regard, and we want you to operate in a way that's most comfortable for you. Finally, let's say you do want to try out some of these new tools. We offer a really great way to do so because you can stand them up. They're virtual appliances. You can use them for as long as you want, depending on the license capabilities of the appliance, and you can turn them off when you're done. So it's a great way to test out new technology as well. Okay, let's move on to protection. So Azure Backup. This is a great solution which allows you to essentially not only back up what's inside of Azure, but you can back up external systems as well. You can do that. Let's say you have a data protection server. That's fine. You can also do that if you have a third-party server, because we can also act as a VTL or a blob repo where essentially you can front-end your backups as you normally would, and you can stream the data as blobs into Azure. Perhaps that's more of a cost-effective way to do it. There are many other options, and if you think about where things went from tape to disk to cloud, it gives you a great way to move along this path. In addition, we also offer geo-replication. So if you're using a blob store vault, it's literally a checkbox if you want to replicate your backups to another region that could be halfway across the world. So again, this is a backup as a service. You don't have to manage any of the Azure backup components in the cloud other than the repository and your rule sets. Site recovery. This is a very useful utility. So not only have some companies decided to go from maybe 2 or 3 data centers down to 1, what they would do in that case would be still have, let's say, their primary data center, perhaps in the US. And instead of having a secondary data center or DR, they would do that in Azure. And we have a very comprehensive product here which allows you to ensure that you're compliant and ensure that you can go through testing of failover in DR. This works against multiple operating systems, multiple hypervisors. The other thing that you can do is you can decide to use this for migration. So a lot of customers will go ahead and do this in batches where they will target certain applications or certain business units and even maybe smaller sites or full data centers, and they will migrate in batches by essentially failing over. So now I want to talk about monitoring. This is the big question of how do you know if things are working the way that they should be? So Azure treats the logging in, we essentially categorize things into 3 different areas. One of them is the control and management logs. Those are typically what you would classify as audit logs. Who is doing what and taking what operations in Azure against the resources within Azure? Who's building out VNets? Who's deleting, who's deleting VMs? Who's modifying your backup jobs? Next, we have the data plan logs. So that has to do with some of the standard metadata that you would attribute to things like performance and capacity. And you can also expand that to go deeper and aggregate information from inside of your VMs, such as internal performance and capacity, even your Windows event logs and your Linux logs. Finally, we also log against our processed events. So for instance, if you have set up custom logging and alerting, or even if you're using the built-in logging and alerting from things like Security Center, those will get logged. But as you can imagine, if you combine those 3, you can end up with tremendous amounts of logs. This is no different than what you would have with any other cloud provider or your private data center. So that's where we developed a utility called Log Analytics. Essentially, this is a large repository where you can send unstructured or semi-structured data, and we can go ahead and analyze it. So if you're used to solutions such as Splunk, the language is fairly similar to that with similar capabilities. The main difference here is that this ends up being log analytics as a service. You don't have to maintain any of the infrastructure or indexers or systems to handle certain amounts of load. This will ultimately come into our system. We're handling all of the capacity management, and you essentially are aware of how much you're consuming on a daily basis. We also have the ability to report against this using PowerBI. I'm going to go into PowerBI in a little bit, but essentially this is an intelligent reporting platform which allows you to create highly customized dashboards with a really slick interface. Lastly, again, going to our openness, if you want to, you don't have to use these utilities, and you can simply treat Azure as an additional data center or set of resources. We have the capability to log outbound from Azure into your systems, whether it's with webhooks or some of the solutions out there have their own SDKs that allow you to harvest the data. So let's talk a little bit more about log analytics. So the nice thing here is we allow the processing of internal and external logs. So just like a lot of the utilities that I've been talking about, if we're going to be managing and securing resources within and external to Azure, we obviously have to be able to deal with the logging as well. The custom alerting capabilities within log analytics are extremely robust, and it's based on a language that Microsoft developed called Custo. Finally, we also have a lot of third-party integration with apps like Grafana to go ahead and provide some open source visualization capabilities. Service maps. So Service Map is really a great utility that is capable of, again, monitoring systems within Azure and outside of Azure. The great thing here is this allows at the network level, the TCP level, a map to be made of desired systems to show you what all the interdependencies are across the selected systems. In a lot of ways, this will show you things that are expected, and it might also display some things that are unexpected. Perhaps someone left a port open someplace and you have someone accessing a system that shouldn't be. So if you do decide to use this for forensics, you can go back 30 days. You have very tight granularity. So you can take a slice of a window within 30 days and take a look at what the clients and what the servers were, what services and what daemons or applications were actually acting as the source and the destination for this traffic. This is also a great dashboard to also show you vulnerabilities for your selected system. So one way that customers have been using this is on an application by application basis. So let's say you have a DevOps team that's focused on a certain application that they've just gone live with. They may be only interested in their 10 or 20 systems or even more to understand the interdependencies and what the traffic looks like. So this gives them a great dashboard which they can drill into to understand the health of their systems. Going down more to the application layer, application insights is a way to essentially monitor and look at the key performance indicators of specific applications. Again, from this view, you can see things like interdependencies. You can look at storage repositories, requests from the customer to see if things are green, or you can quickly identify if you have out of bounds or abnormal response times to figure out if your application is performing in the way that you would expect. This allows for very deep diagnostics into the application level. And literally the way that you enable this is with a few lines of code depending on the language that you're using, and we can go ahead and work directly with your application teams to give them deep visibility. So I want to go into alert definition. So not only do we allow custom alerting against all of these data sets that we're talking about, but the notifications that you can enable, you can literally have an automated system give you a phone call. You can webhook and log out to other systems. Of course, there's email and SMS. The other really cool thing here is you can take action. So if you think about if you have run books for your NOC or your SOC, where there's common activities that they're performing that are fairly known and repeatable, this is a great way to automate them. And essentially what you can do, you can go ahead and use our Logic Apps features or write custom scripts, and again, take action on known activity. So with all of this data, we need good ways to visualize it. So in here, I pasted a couple of different examples of what some companies are doing with PowerBI. And again, these were taken from the marketplace. So these are dashboards that harvest data. They're freely available, and you can go ahead and customize these to your own requirements. PowerBI can access hundreds of data sources. You can also use PowerBI for multiple devices. We've been leading in this area for over 10 years, and this is a great tool that you can use in a pretty focused fashion for individual applications, or you can go ahead and provide executive level reporting that's dynamic. So one other thing, if you're not going to be using Power BI and you want to focus mostly on your Azure resources or even some of your external resources, when you log into portal.azure.com, the first thing that you're presented with is your dashboard. This is where you can go ahead and add things such as VMs, or if you want to, performance charts. You can add more powerful aggregated information, such as some of the security center data if you want. You can have multiple dashboards. So if you think from an RBAC perspective, perhaps you want people to be able to create some of their own dashboards depending on what organization that they're a part of. Okay, so we're going to move on to our last topic now, which is configuration. This is where we're going to talk about things like update management, scripting, DevOps, automation. So a lot of these icons up here are going to be, fairly common to a lot of you, whether it's Visual Studio Team Services, Ansible, Chef, Terraform, Puppet. We have very tight integration with a lot of these configuration management tools. As an example, if you want to, you can go ahead and provision a VM. And one of the options you have for those VMs is if you want to install Chef or Puppet as part of the deployment. And that happens on the Azure side. So there's a lot of tight integration and code development that's gone on with a lot of these companies out there. Finally, we also have a lot of integration with CI/CD pipelines and code deployment. Obviously, code deployment's big. We're the leading contributor to GitHub. We acquired them recently. And the plan there is to ensure that we stay tight with development teams and organizations to ensure that we can continue to streamline your operations. Azure Automation, this is a pretty major capability here where, you can essentially take the existing runbooks that you have and, ultimately make them logical or virtualized. We can do things on the config management side for change management, desired state configuration. Of course, ensuring there's update management occurring. We have a strong commitment to Linux and other operating systems as well. There's Windows and Linux capabilities here. Finally, there's plenty of flexibility in terms of the different modules that you want to tie into here, and making sure that this is part of a really important part of your DevOps organization. ARM templates. So Azure has a great capability, and this is something that is very desired by anyone who's doing DevOps or infrastructure as code, but also for newcomers. If you go into the GUI and you provision any of our objects, one of the options next to the deploy or the create button is automation. And if you click on that, you will be presented with essentially a template, along with the parameters, the CLI, the PowerShell, the .NET, even Ruby, to basically allow you to redeploy this. And some companies, people will go ahead and create with the GUI, pull out the template that was used to create it, and they will inject that into their CI/CD pipeline. So you don't really need to worry. If you don't want to, you don't have to worry too much about mastering a new technology here. We go ahead and enable you for scripting and automation. This is obviously great for making sure environments are repeatable and for creating things like dev, test, and prod, because you truly, if you're operating against the same template, you can truly create similar infrastructures. So today we went over a lot. There is a tremendous amount of complexity involved with architecting any against any cloud provider, data center, really technology stack. You have to make sure you're securing it and protecting it. You need to know how things are going with monitoring. And configuration and governance are extremely important. Architecture is not just arranging systems and networks to perform the activity that you want. That's simply a piece of it from a minimal viable product perspective. But you have to make sure from day 2 onward that you can operate this environment and be agile to the way that is required of the business. So some next steps here. I'm going to open it up to some Q&A. Before I start answering those questions, there's a resources section where I added as many links as I could before the presentation for some of the key talking points. Definitely please submit feedback. I always want to improve, so I'm making better use of your time. If you have any questions around demos or POCs, please speak to, if you have a Microsoft sales rep or a cloud solutions architect like myself. Perhaps you have a partner that you work with. I'm sure they can, steer you in the right direction. We have a lot of free hands-on labs and training as well that you'll see in the attachment section. And this goes without saying. I cannot emphasize this enough. All of this is great, but this is up to you, the viewer, the listener. You have to keep yourself sharp. You have to continue to change. And we're committed to helping you do that. There's lots of free and open training that we offer, whether it be hands-on labs or Pluralsight relative to Azure. Our documentation is really good. And what I mean by that is, not only is it complete, and it includes examples across, GUI, command line, SDK, REST, etc., but the documentation that I look at is the same documentation that you look at. We do not have a secret book someplace where I can, solve extra problems or architect things in a specific way that you don't have access to. So we believe in transparency because that helps build trust. Finally, I was talking about the Azure templates. If you go to GitHub and you look for quick start templates, we literally have hundreds of predefined templates with very detailed documentation describing systems. Let's say you want to deploy a brand new remote desktop services environment. We have templates for that. And inside of GitHub, there's actually a button that you can click to deploy it directly to your subscription. So definitely make use of those. Of course, you can do this using a free Azure account where you have 12 months to try things out. And how could I not talk about BrightTALK? I appreciate them giving me this opportunity. I've, consumed many BrightTALK presentations myself. And with that, there's a huge thank you. And we have about 7 minutes left for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Give me a second here to start reading some. Okay, so here's one question. How does Azure automation and the ARM template help in Azure security? So that's a great question. So one of the most fundamental things about the templates, they create standardization. So once you have configured your template to the specification that you want, if you're doing source control and you're putting your template inside of there, you'll know that that template is consistent and it's secure in terms of what the configuration should look like. So essentially that's the equivalent of, that is automation, and that is ensuring that nothing is deviating without you knowing about it. Okay. There is a question here about, does service map help realize application server mapping or dependencies? Yes. So one great thing about service map, if you install an agent, let's say on a pretty central server that you have, you don't necessarily need to install agents on the client systems or the downstream server systems that system is talking to. It will essentially still show you all of the individual daemons if Linux, or services or executables if Windows, along with what systems they're trying to connect to. So it'll show you the destination IPs. It'll show you the ports that it's trying to talk to. One great thing that I also want to talk about here, if you think about the common hack of, people trying to inject a fake SVC host .exe to be running alongside of the correct one. One cool thing here is if you see traffic that looks a little strange, you can go ahead and drill down into that service and see that it might be running from an unexpected location on the system drive. Okay, I'm going to scroll down to a few more. Okay, can we access a copy of your presentation? I didn't see it in the attachment section. That's a great question. What I'm going to do following our session is I'm going to reach out to my counterpart at BrightTALK to talk about how to make that happen. Essentially what I'll be doing is I'll PDF the presentation and I'll see what he can do about making that available once this session goes into sort of the pre-recorded mode and make sure that those are available to everyone. Log analytics, this is a great question here. Is log analytics only for IaaS, or can I integrate it with my custom application? Again, log analytics essentially is a clearinghouse or just a giant repository for streaming data. You can send IaaS logs, you could send logs from your application. Perhaps your application has debug features built into it, or you want to add some custom lines of code or a function in there to send it to log analytics. So you absolutely can do so. Just to give a very edge case example, you could theoretically use Azure Log Analytics and Azure itself just for log analytics if you wanted to, and send things from any other cloud provider or any on-prem system directly to log analytics for further analysis, custom alerting, and layer things like PowerBI on top of it. Okay. So there's a general question here about, is there any document where we can learn more about how to do the Azure implementation step by step? And I believe I added a link in here under Azure documentation. So if you go to the Azure documentation, or essentially just the Azure website, we have tremendous amounts of documentation on how to architect in Azure. And that goes deeper into what we spoke about here. That will actually tell you how to lay out the individual components of VNets and subnets based upon your requirements. The other thing too is, while I firmly believe it's always great to roll up your sleeves and get right into it, I think another great thing to do, please take a look at the hands-on labs and the Pluralsight free Azure training. A couple years back, that's actually how I got started in Azure. I went to the free training, I opened up a free account. My company was not using Azure, and I'm lucky enough today to have mastered enough to be talking to you guys today. So anybody can take this training, and anybody can start and evolve themselves. So it's really a great thing. Okay, let's see. I'm going to see if there's time for one more question here. Okay, this is a very interesting one. This is the very big "it depends" answer. About security in the cloud, what is provider and customer responsibility? So when you have a data center that's your own, everything is inside those four walls. All the security is yours. When you operate in a cloud provider, depending on the service that you're using, Microsoft might provide the physical security, and they might, secure some of their infrastructure and their logical layers. But if you put data in there, and for instance, you leave that wide open to a publicly facing URL, that's something that was configured by you, and it's a very, hopefully obvious answer of the shared responsibility. Azure might, Microsoft might not know what you want to be doing with your data. So there's plenty of documentation. Google shared security. shared responsibility. It looks like we're going down in about 3 seconds. Thank you all very much.